Welcome to My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 473. A continuation of our special Israel at War edition, which of course is front and center in our minds and our hearts. Hashem should protect every man, woman, and child, every Jewish man, woman, and child in our holy land, in Eretz Yisrael, all over the world. Protect the Tzahal, the soldiers on the front lines who are Moisei Nefesh, literally to defend and protect Klal Yisrael. And we should already have Shalom, and the ultimate Shalom of the geulah Amitis V'Ashlema, being that it's also a week of Podah B'Shalom Nafshi, Yud Dalet Kislev, coming from Yud Kislev. So b'shalom, podah b'shalom, not just a pediyah, but b'shalom, total peace v'nashati shalom ba'aretz. So this program is dedicated to all of that, the protection of each one, and may all the hostages be released unscathed. And especially in the land that is Eretz Asher Eni Hashem Elokecha Ba Mereish Hashanah V'ad Achri Hashanah. This program is also dedicated in loving memory of Miriam Bas Eliyahu Altes Olav Aleh Shalom, and Emerita Baruch Ben Yamin Ben Menucha Lana Altes Yikusil Ben Leah Rachel and Rachel Bas Liba Farkas, dedicated by Pinchas Tadis Ben Miriam and Sarah Bas Rachel Altes. Okay, so let's begin with where we're at and what we know, and most importantly, this is Chassidus applying Torah and Chassidus to the situations in life that we're facing. And here it's not just facing a Milchama Gashmis, a physical war, but also a spiritual one, and a psychological one, an emotional one that's affecting not just the people in the vicinity, the geographic vicinity, but all over the world, and especially in, and not just Beruchnis, also Begashmis. You see the rise of anti-Semitism, the protests. I mean, everybody's on edge, and everybody's still in a collective and individual shock. But as the Rambam says, when a catastrophe strikes, like one that happened October 7th, Shmini Atzeres Simchas Torah, it would be insensitive, achzorius, insensitive and cruel to say it just happened. It's a wake-up call, a time for introspection. Not pointing fingers, not blaming, even ourselves, but to look deeper, because why are we here? We're here in this world because Hashem put us here in this time. So when we witness these things, Hashem, everything a person sees and hears, and so much more so when it's so dramatic or so painful. So that's the first lesson that we learn from Torah in general, and especially Chassidus. The lessons that we need to take out, and first and foremost, the lesson obviously is, like we read in this week's parsha, Yaakov prepared for war. He davened first. He prepared for war, and he prepared a bribe to appease Esau. Thank God he only needed the tefillah and the appeasement. So here, not only prepare for war, we have to go to war. There's no choice. Not because we want to go to war. It's forced upon you. Pure self-defense. Pekuach nefesh. Achmana litzlan. So that's on the most basic level. But as we said, the Milchama is also a ruchnis dikawan. Each one of us have to be mobilized. The words of the Rambam, our introspection, our avodah, strengthening. As we know that ultimately the strength of Eden is not just their military might, spirit. And that is Torah, Aveda, Gemilas Chasadim, the three pillars, and specifically the mitzvahs that have particular features connected to protection, connecting to driving fear in the enemy. Tefillin, as the Gemara says, V'ro kol amei oretz v'yorem emeka. The pasuk says, and the Gemara talks about, that this goes on Tefillin Shalosh, that when they'll see it, they'll be afraid. It drives fear. It's a spiritual weapon. Mitzvah of tzedakah, tatzil from the opposite of life. Mitzvah of Avos Yisrael and Achdus Yisrael, unity is always a keli for bracha, especially shalom. Lighting candles that dispel darkness. Chinuch, especially of young children, b'pi'elim v'yenkim, yisada ta'ez, lahash b'seivim, misnakim, as the Rebbe spoke strongly about right before the Yom Kippur War. Mezuzah, shemer dalsis Yisrael. But every mitzvah is a divine power that transforms this world. This, of course, is in addition to all the support that we show to the morale, financial, emotional, to those that are fighting this battle. But as I've been emphasizing week after week, the battle is not just against. The first thing is, yes, you have to stop the bleeding. You have to eliminate, eradicate the enemy completely. That's what Pekuach Nefesh dictates. That's Simon Chavtes, essentially. A sworn enemy, you have to treat as an enemy until proven otherwise. And in that sense, what you want is a total eradication or total sincere surrender, a return of all the hostages, eliminating all the calls for the destruction of Jews. Can this happen naturally without a miracle? That can be debated. Some say it can't, but regardless, that's why you fight a battle, not because you want to fight a battle. Not just because you don't want your own losses. You don't want losses of anyone. But when it's forced upon us, as I mentioned. So that is the classic approach of how a Id fights a Milchama. Begashmis, beruchnis. Yeshua fought Amalek. Moshe is praying. Yoav, when Surya went out to Milchama, David HaMelech is praying. There's Milchama Ruchnis, Milchama Gashmis, and they're hand in hand. But then come some more key points, and we discussed them as well, and we'll talk about it this week as well. And that is that being that the Rebbe told us that we're mamish at the saf, on the threshold of the geulah, so at the end of the days there will be battles, and we're told there will be battles with Bnei Yishmael. And we've discussed, can we call them Bnei Yishmael, but definitely that region has an association with Yishmael, one way or another. So that adds, what does that add? It doesn't take away from what we still have to do, but it adds an element of betachon, the language of the Yalkut Shmeni. Don't be afraid, everything I'm doing for you. Yigiyaz man gulascha. So we need to know that the end story is going to be absolutely beautiful. Yes, it caused a lot of pain, a lot of grief. We're not minimizing it. But that doesn't define us. What defines us is where we're marching toward, not what we're marching against. The wake-up call that this has created in the world, the entire world, Jewish people, like never before, a unity, an eagerness to understand what it means. We've been woken up, unfortunately, by the enemy. What does it mean to be Jewish? Why am I being targeted? What is a Jew? What do they want from us? Why do they hate us? And Jews are turning out in record numbers, wanting to put on tefillin, doing a mitzvah, anything. Touched a nerve. And as the Rebbe spoke in Tavshel Chav Zayin, after the 6-day war, it was V'hiyeh Bayemahu Yitaka B'Shefer Gadol, a wake-up call that affected Uba Evdim Eretz Ashur and Nedochim Eretz Mitzrayim, all the sugim, all the categories, those lost to assimilation, those downtrodden due to oppression. To what? Lishtachvis al Hashem al Har Kodesh. That's what's required of us. Lishtachvis al Har Kodesh, Hashem. The acceptance and understanding the responsibility and the mission that each Jew was given. Going back to Matan Torah, V'atam tili mamlachas kein v'gei kodesh, v'hisim li am's geulah, a special nation, mikamchi Yisrael goy echad ba'aretz, that would bring unity, divine unity into this world. Like Avraham Avinu, our forefather, began, as we read in these week's chapters, the process of revealing elam, revealing godliness in every part of this world through Torah mitzvahs and through the spreading of the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei the universal laws, which were also connected to Matan Torah, as the Rambam says, that we have to teach it and inspire it based on the fact that it was given at Sinai. So it's divine laws, the divine laws of civilization that make this world l'sheves yitzara, a worthy place of being a dira betachon, a home for the divine in this world. So this wake-up call is now something that we have people's attention. So it's our job is to do everything possible to utilize it to the fullest. That is part of this mission. So in addition to our own inspiration, in addition to our own families and communities, to reach out. And as I said, you don't even have to reach out. People are reaching to us. When I say us, to every person who's in the position. I can speak from my own experience. Unprecedented, the number of people watching, people listening, asking questions. Jews and non-Jews. Yes, and even Christians and Muslims too. Not like some are thinking, they've exposed themselves as the enemy, let's just gather together and hide under a rock. Yes, there are people who are either ignorant or just plain haters or plain anti-Semites, but there are many that are either confused or are neutral or don't know or are receptive and are very sympathetic, but they need more information. They need to not just information as in data, but also what to do. So this requires nothing less than a revolution of goodness and kindness. In the words of the Rebbe to CNN when he said, what is the Rebbe's message to the world? Which in essence, tzedek v'yesher, encompasses all the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei and really encompasses kol ha'teira kula, which is lenit l'teira, l'lasher shalom b'el, to bring peace into this world. The words of Rabbi Akiva, v'ahavta lecha kamecha, said klal gadol b'teira, klal gadol. Hillel said, zui kol ha'teira, not to do unto others that you don't want done unto yourself. This is the essence of it. So we have an unprecedented historic wake-up call that we need to respond to, everyone in our own way. So this is a general overview of where we're at. This is not a place to go over the news updates of every detail. We're going to talk definitely about the hostages that were released. Many questions came in about that and other developments. But overall, Eretz Yisrael has to know and be encouraged and recognize themselves that this war has to go till the end. An end is either you eradicate the enemy totally, as has been announced, or you get absolutely unconditional surrender, and then you dictate the terms. That's how battles are won. Something that Rebbe emphasized time and again. It's actually common sense, but it's also something that the Torah emphasizes. That's what has to happen when you're dealing with Ra, when you're dealing with an enemy. More specifically this week, continuing the overviews also, tonight, tomorrow is Yud Dalet Kislev, the anniversary, the 95th anniversary, I should say, of the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin Tafresh Pei Tes. We're now at Tafresh Pei Dalet, and Yud Dalet Kislev. It's also this week, is the week of Yud Tes Kislev. It's coming Shabbos, Chag geulah, Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus. So in usual times, that would be the main emphasis, but being that what's so prominent and so much in our minds is the Mitzvah ha'elam, so a few lessons that we will also discuss from these days, how we can learn from them. Let's start with Yud Dalet Kislev. Say, what connection is there? Chassan of the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin. Well, remember, the big picture is this. When the Eibishter created the world, Bereshis bara Elokim, he created with that tzimtzum, a concealment, with the kavanah that we should reverse the process and reveal godliness in a concealed world. It's the essence of it all, to make a dira betachon. In the language of Kabbalah, and Chassidus brings it and explains it, is to create yichud, a yichud of kudsha b'richa v'shchinta, which means, before that tzimtzum, everything was hayahu shmei belvad, achani le'nivra elam. Everything was one seamless unity, one seamless divine consciousness. The Tzimtzum concealed it, so it became, so to speak, from the perspective of the recipient, as if there's two consciousness, the divine consciousness and the consciousness of existence. In the language of Chassidus, that before the Tzimtzum Elokus b'pshitas, v'elam is b'schachos. What was given was the seamless reality of divinity, Eined Malvade, nothing else. And the existence of world is a novelty. The Rebbe created, Bereshis, Bara, Yeshmayin, through the Tzimtzum and the whole process. After the Tzimtzum, the consciousness turns around. Elam is b'pshitas. What's a given to us is the world we see. And Elokus is b'schachos. So Elokus is like the novelty that needs to be introduced, when the truth is the other way around. But that's how it is. So there's, so to speak, the possibility of seeing two realities. And our goal is Hashem Echad, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, to create unity. That's the whole story in a nutshell. Where does that unity express itself? On every possible level. But one place, the microcosm of Yichud Kudsha B'richa V'Shchinta, of Zohar and Malchus in the language of Chassidus and Kabbalah, is the Yichud of a Ish V'Isha, a marriage, a Kedushin, a sacred marriage, of Zocher Nekeva Bara Esam. The Eibishter created them as one, an androgynous being, split into two, split again like the Tzimtzum split, in order to find each other and reunite. And that's why a chasana is not just a simcha for those individuals, it's a simcha that we talk about, Gan Eden Mikedem, and Mehedi Yeshama, and Yetzirah Adam. All about recreating the unity as it was when Adam and Chava were created. Especially when you talk about a chasana of a Rebbe and a Rebbetzin, which is an neshama golus. So it's not just an individual. Even an individual, as I said, that unity ripples through all of existence. But especially of a Rebbe and a Rebbetzin that would become a Rebbe in Tavshin Yud. So you can imagine that reflects a profound unity. When you see war, when you see discord, you see conflict, that's all a result of the Tzimtzum. So a chasana is meant to counter that. So on Yud Dalet Kislev we have the power to create that yichud and recreate the yichud. The Rebbe said in Tavshin Yud Dalet, which we're talking now 70 years ago, that this is the day, Yud Dalet Kislev, that bound me to you and you to me. May we see fruits from our labor, Pedis, when Ismat in them golus. Basically, wear out the golus and bring the geulah. So you see Tsugibun, again, Eis Kashrus. So definitely on a cosmic level, and even on a personal level, a day like this, 95th anniversary, gives special keiches, firstly to find the unity that we need to find in our lives, individually, and in our own homes and families, Sholem Bayis, and by extension, the yichud that creates in the entire world. So it's a day of such keiches. Yud Dalet Kislev we'll talk about a little later in the program. That's just an opening regarding, since right now, tonight and tomorrow is Yud Dalet Kislev. And we should see Taka Pedis. Pedis means my Peda mitzvahs, the mitzvahs that we do. Ela tel the saying, Shal Sadikim is what's the tel Shal Sadikim? Maisim Tevim, good deeds. The things we learn from the Rebbe, the Heiros, the actions, many of them I mentioned before. So in a sense, Yud Dalet Kislev, the best way to honor it is to be the arms and legs and continue, perpetuate what the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin represented. We are their children. V'shenantum levanecha ela talmidim. The children are the students. Mazari b'chaim, afu b'chaim. That's our role. As the children are alive, so too they live through us. So everything that we have to do today, we look into the Rebbe Sichos, which of course are based on Shulchan Aruch, based on Torah, based on the Maimonim and the Sichos of the Rabbeim before the Rebbe, all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu Matan Torah. And we apply it to our lives now regarding the issues we're discussing here. But of course, it applies to every aspect of life. Okay. So that's a general overview. It's also the week of Parshas Vayishlach, which we'll discuss as well as we go on in the program. What I'd like to begin with is similar to the structures I've been doing in the previous weeks, is things we talked about, finding strength and direction. I'm going to talk about the hostage return and other extremely relevant questions that you have sent in and continue to send in. It's hard to keep up, to be honest, but I'm trying to consolidate and a lot of topics. Hopefully I can cover some more and really make it through and really address the issues that are on all of our minds and hearts. And I continue to encourage, and please send in all your questions and comments at chasidusapply.com. There's a forum there, completely anonymous and confidential, that you can submit any question. Nothing's taboo, nothing's off limits. You can also find the previous programs and other resources there. I should already mention that we also have created a special page right beginning after October 7th, after Yom Tov, on meaningfullife.com/war in Israel, where it's constantly being updated literally daily with new videos and new articles and new materials that address every topic. There's actually a section there called Topics, where you can find by a list of table of contents of different categories, trying to address the entire spectrum of issues that are rising in context of the war and context of everything surrounding it. Okay, so with that, let us go to some general questions and then more specific ones. Let's start with strength and direction. So someone asked the question, what are some practical steps we can take to change our daily mindset from the negativity of golus to the positivity of geulah so that we can actualize the geulah and make it the reality? Of course, this applies specifically to our time right now because even though it's a general question for all times, but especially when you see losses, you see the unknowns and the confusion and the doubts, and you have an enemy that you're dealing with, sometimes very difficult to stay positive. So let me read another question and answer them both. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I was part of the beautiful rally for Israel in D.C. I felt so much love and unity there. Since it's been over, I noticed I'm feeling despair. The rest of the world just doesn't seem to understand why Israel is in this war. I watched on CBS News as a reporter interviewed a top official of Hamas. She asked him what he wanted. His answer, freedom. I was appalled. That man is a terrorist. Please help me find strength and hope again. Thank you. So let's take one at a time, but it's similar spirit. There are many other questions that come in, both in writing and also verbally, that and it's not so easy, Betachon is not always an easy process. We try our best, but it's not always that easy. So there is the betachon shebelev, so to speak, which is a mindset, as you put it, or a heart set. And that is, a person wakes up in the morning and says, Moida'ani, and focuses that Hashem is giving you life, and you're acknowledging it with gratitude, and you say the brachas, and you daven properly. And you learn Chassidus before davening, after davening, that tzedakah you give during davening and before davening, afterwards. And in general, you go into a day driven by the mission for which we were created, which is to make a dira b'tachtenim. So in general, that just puts your mind that your focus is on your mission, not on the immediate news, and not even on the negative things that are happening. So that's the general preemptive approach. Now, of course, practically speaking, it's not that easy, because then when you hear what's happening, it's human nature, you're intrigued by it, and then you start saying, "Oi, look at this loss. A 20-year-old, God forbid, soldier has fallen." So it's inevitable it's going to bring us down. But that is why the more you arm yourself, and I'm using that word deliberately, the more you arm yourself with the arsenal of spiritual weapons, which means the things that you do that are connected to fulfilling your mission in this world, namely Torah and Mitzvahs. Ani nivresi l'shamash eskeni. I was created in order to serve. Or ani lo nivresi ella, which is even stronger. I wasn't created for anything else but to serve. That in general gives you an alternative. So you have something to focus on. If you don't focus on that, then the only thing you are like a ship at sea being pulled out to all the storms, the ravaging and raging storms of the news, of the events, without a type of grounding, an anchor. That's why it's so critical to have these anchors. And the more you have them, the more you can hold on to them for your dear life. Think of a storm. You have to have something to hold on to, or else you're going to be just swept away. So that's in general terms the approach. But it goes further than that. The more you focus on that there's a God that created it all, and even if you don't know the answers to why they're suffering, why there's pain, and why this happened, but there's a God. And that God is Ani Hashem Le'Shanisi, B'nai Yisrael Le'Chalisam. We see the Jewish people are here, Am Yisrael Chai, for thousands of years. So it gives you, it's not just a pure abstract of faith, there's real evidence that we've gone through so much, and look. So that additionally strengthens. Then when you take into account, and that's why we talk about it, it's not just nice medrash, that we're marching toward geulah, and sometimes the last steps are difficult. It brings out Yisparu v'Yislabna Dvorim, some of the darkness emerges, some of the darkest darkness. But we're going toward a destination. And you're not alone. It's another point. You go with the entire Jewish people. And not just of this generation, but all generations. We're standing on the shoulders of giants before us. It's an accumulative process, a marathon, an unbroken chain, passed on the baton from generation to generation. These are things that give strength. And even on a very military level, you think it's easy for a person to be on the front lines and have to face an enemy and unknowns? And yet you see there's a morale, there's a certain strength. It comes from leaders, it comes from each other, but it comes from Amunah Pshuta. You ask many soldiers, you see the beautiful videos, those touching videos. It's not just that they're being religious, they're praying to God to protect them. It's actually a source of strength. Hashem Eiz La'ami Yiteh. It's called Eiz, strength. Yisada to Eiz. It's a form of strength that helps the spirit of a person, which is critical. Because you could have all the weapons in the world, you could be superior to your enemy, but if you don't have the spirit, if you don't have the willpower, you don't have the conviction and the clarity and that fortitude, maybe likely, God forbid, you will not be able to prevail. So all this comes together to add up to an attitude. Always being around people that have this approach gives tremendous confidence. Being around people who are cringing and wringing their hands and feeling desperate or hopeless does not usually help. Our job is to be the first category and also help others in that way. So these are some of the methods. I would add something I always focus on. It's in the same spirit. Find your particular mission in this war. Make sure every day you send out a bunch of emails or texts or social media to people with inspiration, with heartwarming words, a story, a video. Be on the offense, and you'll be less on the defense. Best defense is offense. So find something specific that you're doing, that you're committed to. And the more you commit to it, the less aggravation, the less despair, the less negativity will enter. That's the rule. A little light dispels much darkness, especially a lot of light. But it's not just a cliche. It means simply be focused on being a light bearer. Anom pala yemama anan. We're day workers. We're here to bring light to the world. There's darkness, so we need more light. That attitude is the attitude of a winner that forges ahead and overcomes the storms and ultimately prevails until we transform it all into a true geulah world. Beginning with the geulah pratis within ourselves. So that answers both questions. You can apply it more specifically, each one in their own way. So regarding the first question, the mindset, understanding we're in the process going to geulah, which is gilui alakus, and that's through our being megala, through our lives and through our lives, godliness around us. And as far as the second question is being with others and strengthening yourself in all the ways that we just discussed. Okay. So now, a whole bunch of questions came in regarding the hostage returns and exchanges. So, let me read some of them and try to respond the best possible way. The first question, of course, is this the correct approach? Would the Rebbe had been in favor of exchanging terrorists for the Jewish hostages? That's a specific question. But the question is also, just in general, is this the right approach to be negotiating with your enemy while you're fighting and giving into some things, a ceasefire they want, not to use drones? So what should be the general attitude? And of course it's complicated because you're dealing with hostages, innocent men, women, and children, and whose heart does not go out to them. So what do you do in a situation like this? Now it's important to emphasize we're not here to second guess what Eretz Yisrael has done. They made their decision. They didn't ask us. They have their cheshbonos. Whether you agree or not, we have to support the effort in every possible way, even if what they may have done is not the right thing to do. And secondly, we have to also be sensitive to the fact that we do celebrate every person. Pidyon Shvuim is one of the biggest mitzvahs, especially when you see children and mothers and young people. I mean, anyone. So you cannot help but celebrate the fact that they've been released. Unfortunately, there's another 200 or whatever the number is that have not been. But that doesn't take away nefesh achas miyisrael. But that is independent of the question around the war strategy. Is what do you do in a situation like this? Do you give in anything just to get those hostages out? That's the question. So let's phrase the question in more detail, and then I'll address it. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I just watched a video of the motorcade of the first group of released hostages entering back into Israel and saw thousands of Israelis lining the streets, waving Israeli flags and singing Am Yisrael Chai and cheering for them and welcoming them back. It's so beautiful to see the Avos Yisrael we Jews have for each other. To a simple person like me, it's so obvious that there's such a huge revelation of Hashem's positive energy during these times, and it's clear that Mashiach cannot ignore it, and that this is a perfect time for him to come. I guarantee that as the last group of hostages return safely to Israel, Mashiach himself will be waiting to greet them and cheer them on as their motorcade passes, and may it be Hashem's will that it happen very soon. Amen. And I think we all share the sentiments, as I just said, when a life is saved, especially in such horrendous circumstances, is something to thank God for. That's on an individual level of these people and their families, and for all of us. Then there's the other side of the coin. And not to say the other side of the coin again, I don't want to take away from this Hatzalah. And yes, we absolutely pray that all the hostages should be released. But we're dealing here with still an enemy that has done what they did and are saying they'll do it again. And they're not obliterated. It's not like they surrendered and gave up the hostages. It was part of a discussion, a negotiation. So that brings us to the next question. Would the Rebbe have been in favor of exchanging terrorists for the Jewish people or hostages? It seems like this is a spiritual battle as well. Christian missionaries are sending out innocent-looking videos that appear on Jewish WhatsApp groups. A pastor spoke at the White House in front of 300,000 Jewish people and even more online. It seems like they're attacking Jews spiritually. We must reach out to every Jew. Please comment. Okay, this is two separate questions, which I really should have separated, but I read them. They all came from the same person. But let's focus on the hostages, then we'll talk about the other issues. Rav Simon, what does the Rebbe say about getting back captured Yidden in exchange for the release of terrorists? Bracha v'atzlacha. Okay. So, there are two sichos, mainly Mitzvah Shabbos Pasha Bamidbar, Tavshin Lametes, it would be 1979, and there is a sicha Zeis Chanukah Tavshin Memvov, where the Rebbe briefly talks about it, but talks in general about whole Mitzvah and Yisrael. So they're definitely both worth looking at. There the Rebbe talks and speaks about, number one, that yes, Pidyon Shvoim is a big mitzvah. Saving one person is a big thing. And the Rebbe says, but that's a halacha question. That's a halacha question. And halacha, indeed, there are issues with that. As much as it's a big mitzvah, there are conditions. What happens if the people who've kidnapped that hostage, Rahman al-Islam, are asking for an exorbitant amount of money that the community does not have? How far do you have to go? And what happens when an issue that they will see this as emboldening them to do it again? They see, oh, they're paying for hostages. So that's an incentive to take more hostages. So that's why there are halacha issues with this issue. This doesn't take away again after the fact that somebody was saved, they were saved, but before the fact. But the most important thing the Rebbe addresses there, he says that's a halacha question. There's another question here. We're not just talking about hostage and you're paying a ransom. You're returning people who may be terrorists. So in this case, I know people will say they were only returned women and children that were arrested. Well, number one is, why were they arrested? Was it just a misdemeanor? And number two, we see that the policy was that hostages have been returned for terrorists. Actually, the head of Hamas today was once a prisoner in Israel and was returned in one of these exchanges. 1,000 for shalit. So here's another question here, which is not just a matter of, okay, how much do you pay and will you incentivize them? It's a question also, you're putting more people in danger. So you saved a life, but that person is very likely, and it says he's going to attack again, and the Rebbe brings that there. So the Rebbe said they try to keep it a secret. The bottom line is, from a strategic point of view, and even from a halachic point of view, you have another issue here, which is you're putting more people in danger. But the halacha here is one aspect of it. There's also the whole general picture here. The general picture here, as the Rebbe says in that sikh, he says, the problem, he says, is the whole attitude. The whole attitude is one that's the opposite of Eilech Eskem Kemimiyas. Kemimiyas means walking with pride. With pride means you're fighting a war, you're confident in your cause and your moral conviction. You know why you're fighting the war, because of what happened October 7th. You know what the enemy wants. And you called for their eradication, which makes total sense, unless there's total unconditional surrender. So why are you not continue with that approach? So it's true the hostages are a big issue. But at the end of the day, is that something you should take into account? Because what happens now? The momentum of the forward progress is slowed down. There's a ceasefire. What do you think the enemy is going to do now? They're going to dangle more hostages. As we said, they now see, oh, you respond to that. There was once a time, as the Rebbe speaks there in that sikha, that Israel said we don't negotiate with terrorists by principle, even for small matters, let alone for other people, for returning others, and 3 for 1 or 10 for 1 or whatever the numbers are. Because you don't want them to feel that you're giving them. Imagine World War II. This is my example. The Rebbe doesn't bring this. Berlin is being bombed. It's clear the Allies are winning. And the Germans suddenly say, you know what, if you make a ceasefire, we'll give you 100 or 1,000 Jews from a concentration camp. We'll free them. Not to mention, of course, that there are thousands of others. What do you think the Allies would do? They'd say, okay, let's save those people. Of course you want to save the people. That's why this is so sensitive. I don't want in any way, God forbid, minimize their lives. But there's a bigger picture here. And unfortunately, there are lives that are lost, sometimes innocent lives. Here you could add even something more, and I'm, again, not a military strategist. Hamas, the enemy, is invested to make sure these hostages don't get killed. They don't mind their own civilians getting killed, ironically. Because what do they have from a dead hostage, God forbid? That's the only leverage they have. So they're protecting them because it's the only thing that will protects them. They're protecting the hostages because it's protecting them. Now, of course, we know what they're capable of doing. We know what they've done. They can kill in the worst possible way. And What you really want in a strategy in a battle like this, the enemy has to be on their knees. They should be begging, I'm surrendering, I'm returning all the hostages to you. You didn't get them all. So now the pressure is going to be getting the other hostages. And the same argument. Why those hostages are less important than those? Because they were children, I understand. So I'm not suggesting there's an easy way out and there's one perfect solution. It's essentially choosing from two evils. So the Rebbe's general approach was, you're fighting a war, you have to fight a war. We have to have Rachmanis on hostages, absolutely, intelligence, and do everything possible to save them. But you have to remember there's also more going on here. I mean, the point of being appeasing and letting down your guard and letting a whole infrastructure to be built right under your home is itself a sign of a certain lack of that fortitude. But it's critical, and I want to emphasize this. The point here is not to criticize Israel and criticize. We're discussing it as an attitude. The question was asked, what would the Rebbe's approach be? And the Rebbe wanted Israel to change its policy, meaning it's not something we should go and impose ourselves. It's not for demonstrations, and it's not to oppose it. The point is to educate and try to inspire the government to feel this way. Now, we don't know what's going on behind closed doors, so that's a given. That's why I don't want to say this in a way, this should be the strategy. But you're asking the general approach of the Rebbe is that approach, strength. Yes, sometimes war brings peace when you're dealing with a true enemy. Germany had to be completely destroyed, unconditional surrender, as the Japanese, and then there was real peace. And today they were rebuilt, they've been rebuilt, and they live peacefully with the United States, with the allies, with Israel. Were there prices paid? Of course, many, many people died, unfortunately. Terribly. So that's the general approach, and as I said, I shared which sikhs to look at. So there's a lot of aspects here. There's the exchange of the hostages, which is an issue halachically as well as strategically. And then there's the bigger issue, where this is leading to. What's going to happen now?